Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the Read Tech webinar, Upskill with Read Tech, all about the numbers. Today, Gary will be doing most of the heavy lifting here. We have Gary Zehner, our Senior Manager of Information Solutions here at Read Tech. Gary is also the chair of the SPL Technical Committee, so we're lucky to have him filling us in on all of this information today. And I am Erin McDermott. I will be joining Gary on the presentation as well. Okay. Just a couple quick logistical things before we get started. Hopefully most of you are familiar with GoToWebinar, but you'll see just some quick notes here. This webinar is being recorded, and we will email all of you guys a copy of the recording and slides at some point later this week. We will be taking live Q&A at the end of the presentation, time permitting. So if you have any questions at all, you can submit those at any time during the presentation. We will be reviewing them, and then we'll get to them at the end. And if you do have any technical difficulties, of course, please just send me a message, and we will try to troubleshoot that for you as well. Okay. And for everything not covered in our presentation today, we did want to show you our Knowledge Center here on our website, readtech.com. What you're looking at here is a screenshot of our homepage. If you navigate to resources in the top toolbar, choose Knowledge Center, and then go to drug label research or drug and biologic products submissions, depending on which subject area you're interested in. You can find archives of our past webinars, virtual events, and blog posts. And of course, also please follow us on social media, LinkedIn and Twitter for current updates. Okay, so Gary has quite a lot to cover with you guys today. And hopefully he'll start by turning some of these letters and acronyms into words for us, because there are quite a lot of them. So we will be looking at the US FDA NDC, FEI numbers, DUNS numbers, and we'll spend just a few minutes at the end talking about how Read Tech can help you figure some of this out. So with that, Gary, I will turn it over to you, and hopefully you can unravel some of this puzzle for me and put some meaning behind these letters.
Yeah, thanks, Erin. And is always a little bit of a challenge working through acronyms. And if you're new to the industry, there's a huge learning curve. Those that have been in regulatory space for a little while, they start to look familiar. And once you start working with them, it becomes second nature. But I realize, huge learning curve right up front. So maybe we'll get started over at with the US FDA NDC number. And I think what we'll do today is use our question and answer discussion, going back and forth. We've collected a number of questions. Erin will be posing some of those questions, and then we'll be talking about some of those answers and trying to work our way through this. So Erin, I think this is the first question that we had, which is a frequent question about the NDC. Why don't you go ahead and introduce that?
Absolutely. Well, Gary, probably the most basic question of our SPL labeling industry. Please tell me about the NDC. First off, what is it?
Well, the real short, quick answer is pretty straightforward. So the National Drug Code is this identifier that's for products. It's for the US domain. So this is not outside of the US. It can be used outside of the US as a reference, obviously, but the FDA manages this and kind of watches over it. And the intent is to identify human drugs and biologics and also veterinary drugs. So when we start to get into some of the details on the National Drug Code, we find that it's a 10-digit number. There's 3 segments, and you see in the upper right there, each of those segments are separated by a hyphen. So labeler code, product code, and package code are those three segments in that particular order with the hyphen separation. Now, this NDC number is applicable to finished products, unfinished products, and also compounded drug products. So it will uniquely identify a particular drug product, and it also points back to the labeler, the organization connected to that particular product. Now, this NDC number is not just used for reporting and for identifying products to the FDA for review. Excuse me. It's also applied to the product label and used in a lot of reference material. Excuse me. So it goes through the full supply chain, the full life cycle of that particular product. So even if it's being imported into the U.S., if it's manufactured outside and then comes in, supply chain in the U.S., all the distribution through the prescribing, dispensing at the pharmacies, and even to the point of payment and reimbursement and that sort of thing, and collecting information on that particular drug product. So it's very valuable in uniquely identifying that particular drug product. So Erin, I think you had another follow-up question. Let's go there.
Yes, the first of many follow-up questions, Gary.
Yeah.
So who owns and who manages the NDC?
Yeah, so I alluded a little bit to the FDA being the owner. They provide some primary functions and attributes of the National Drug Code. I would consider them like the primary owner and manager. They specify the format, how it's to be constructed. They are also responsible for assigning that first segment, the NDC labeler code, to organizations, and they do collect the information. They make the information, a lot of the information, publicly available, and a number of databases. So they do keep an eye and check on those particular values, make sure they come in and that they're valid. Now, all that said, there's an argument that would say the labeler is a co-owner and a co-manager. And the reason for that argument is that, remember, there's three segments in the NDC code. The second segment, the product code, and the third segment, the package code, are the responsibility of the labeler. So they are definitely involved in creating and managing that. The full NDC number then is the labeler's responsibility to allocate to their product portfolio and figure out the various products and the packaging schemes. And there's various levels of packaging, inner and outer. So all of those get a unique NDC number, and then they obviously need to submit those NDC values to the FDA. So there is this, I guess, dual ownership and management on the NDC. Let's take a look at the next question that you have there, Erin.
Yeah. So Gary, could you give our audience a short summary of sort of when and why the NDC was started?
All right, so we're going to have to go back in time. This is a time capsule, because this NDC has some really early roots going all the way back to 1969. So at that point in time, the commissioner of then Food and Drug, that particular individual established a voluntary NDC system and an NDC directory. So this information was published. And again, back in 1969, it would have been published on paper. So the intent was to provide an identification system in computer language. Boy, that was pretty, forward thinking. In a computer language to permit automated processing of human prescription drug data for some of the agencies in the government and the manufacturers and other, entities in the industry. So that was the early roots of the NDC code. not exactly as we know it today, but very close. It had 3 segments. Now, there's 2 other milestones that we need to bring up if we're doing this quick, short summary. 1972 is significant because it changed the voluntary aspect of the submission over to a mandatory submission, and it expanded the scope from just human prescription to be human prescription and over the counter, and also include the animal drugs. So 1972 was when this Drug Listing Act was enacted, and that put some more meat and some enforcement on the NDC. And then noteworthy is 2009 is when the FDA required drug information to be submitted electronically. So prior to that, you were able to use PDF type of submissions, but now it had to be packaged in an electronic health level 7 standard. We've come to know that as structured product labeling, SPL. So this SPL is an XML based document, and it's able to capture a lot of information about a drug product, including the NDC number. And that particular file is able to be transferred electronically to the FDA through their particular gateway, referred to as electronic submissions gateway. So those 3 dates are very significant over the course of time, and that's where we are today, packaging NDC numbers and a lot of other information in SPLs and submitting it through the electronic submission gateway.
Yes.
So
And
with
I guess
that,
if this is the first you're hearing of the 2009 update, you're going to want to give Reed Tech a call.
right. Yeah. So this was yeah, the transfer of PDF over to SPL, and yeah, that should have been long taken care of at this point in time. All right, Aaron, what do you have next on the list here?
So Gary, can you tell us more about how the NDC is created and also how it is maintained?
Sure. So the first thing we'll talk about is that labeler code. So there's 4 steps, pretty straightforward, and working your way through the steps necessary to create the NDC labeler code. So that's the very first segment that needs to be taken care of. Now, manufacturers, repackagers, and relabelers, so all of those are responsible parties to submit a listing for a drug product. And part of that listing is a identification using the NDC. So before you can actually list the product, you do have to have a labeler code, and you'll need to submit this information. We talked about that being submitted in this electronic format, SPL labeler code request. And there are some attributes that need to be included and captured in that particular document, such as the DUNS number, the company name, contact information, and so on. We'll talk about DUNS number a little bit later, but the next step is that the FDA would receive that SPL document and then assign a particular code to your company, and then email it back to the contact listed in that document. So now you do have a number, which is the NDC labeler code number. There's a couple more steps that you need to do, though. One is to resubmit that SPL labeler code request, because when you requested that information, you put all the attributes in, but the actual labeler code was blank, because you didn't know it. You were requesting that. Now that you have received it, you fill that particular field in, and then you send that particular document back in. Yes, it's still called a labeler code request, but now it's more like a labeler code report that you send back to the FDA. They then take that and confirm that, and then they start to have that particular labeler code assigned to your company, and they have some websites that actually show that. And for the most part, you're done. So step 4 there is you really only need to submit an update if there's a data change. So maybe the contact information, maybe the phone number changes, or the person's name. If you had used that, physical name, possibly there's a zip code change or phone number change or something like that. But if that information is static and no change, then you can just leave this particular document in place and keep that labeler code. Now, this is only the first segment, right? Remember, we talked about 3 segments that went into the NDC labeler code, or into the NDC. The labeler code is now taken care of. We have that. The second and third segments are much more difficult, in my opinion. A labeler then has to take a look at their portfolio and determine how they're going to, assign these particular numbers and track them and manage them. So they do have a mapping exercise to take the product code, map it to if they have internal part numbers or some other identification, but look at the various requirements. There are some rules about assigning product codes, the form and the ingredients and that sort of thing. And then also the package code. So for each package code, it has different quantity that you will need to have a different code connected with that. So base product, intermediate container, outer container, and so on. When you finally figure that out, and you are sending in a drug listing, so the timing is a little bit different here if it's a branded drug with like a new drug application, or an ANDA, some other activities involved. If it's over the counter and that sort of thing. So the eventual step 6 there is to capture that NDC number for the particular product levels, packaging levels, and submit that back to the FDA. And again, an SPL document is used for that particular submission. Now, the listing for that drug product is quite different than the labeler code that we talked above. There is an ongoing maintenance. So the FDA would prefer that you make an update if anything changes to your drug information, and you submit that at the time of change. There are 2 dates, June and December, that are identified in the regulations that are the milestones for you to do an evaluation and say, okay, has any, do a check. Anything changed? If so, go ahead and make that submission. Now, let's say nothing has changed and you didn't have any updates, then there is a requirement that you still do something for each year. And that would be the 4th quarter, October, November, and December, submit a certification document that says nothing has changed. Basically, you're telling the FDA that this product is still active, but there's been no change. So there's a certification of a no change. So there is ongoing maintenance when you list the NDC, include the NDC number in some of your listings. Now let's talk about step number 8 there. What happens if the product is pulled off the market? So there is something called a marketing end date where you can put that field in, submit that information either at the package level or for all the packages and the base product. Everything may be delisted and no longer placed commercially on the market. So you do have to keep that in mind, that there's a retirement, the sunset activity. So these are some of the steps. So let's get into the actual details, the mechanics. We talked about the 10 digits with 3 segments and 2 hyphens. Now, what we haven't talked about are the possibilities of using three different formats. So the first format listed there is this 442, and that refers to 4 digits for the labeler code, 4 digits for the product code, and 2 products for the packaging code. And then in similar conversation, 532 and 541. If you do receive, if you put a request in today, really good chance that you would get a 5-digit labeler code, because the FDA has kind of run out of numbers for the 4. They've already been assigned. So let's say you get that 5-digit labeler code, and then you as a labeler, remember, you're responsible for the next 2 segments. So you could actually pick, but once you do pick, you have to stay in that particular format. So if you pick the 532, meaning that you have 3 digits to identify products, 2 digits for packaging. So if you have a lot of packaging configuration options and levels, the 2 digits there would allow you to go, from 100 different combinations, 00 to 99. On the other hand, if you don't have a whole lot of packaging levels, but you have a lot of products, then the 541 might be more suitable for you. So the 4 digits there would be 0000 up to 9999, basically 10,000 possibilities for the product code. Make your selection wisely, because once you pick that, you're stuck with it until you get a new labeler code. So let's talk a little bit more about these segments and kind of summarize what we have here. So the first segment, we've been talking about that being the labeler code. It has those 4 or 5 digits. It's assigned by the FDA, and it points to a very specific manufacturing firm, an organization. That second code, or second segment, is that product code. And again, 3 or 4 digits in this case. That's the responsibility of the labeler. And based on some variability, some rules, the strength, the dosage, form, and the formulation, ingredients, and so on, would all have to be the same for that particular product. If anything changes from that initial product, then you'd have to sign a second product and a corresponding product code for that second product. And then the last segment, either 1 or 2 digits, again, the labeler's responsibility to assign that. And you have to look at the various types of packaging that you have. Is this a bottle? Is it a blister pack? Other types of containers. And then what is the quantity? So this has to be uniquely assigned to that particular scenario. So if you have a bottle with 30 capsules in it, and you also market a bottle with 50 capsules in it, that cannot be the same package code. That would definitely need to have a different package code. Could be the very same product, and it's just the quantity makes the difference. All right, Aaron, I think we have beat this topic to death. Actually, there's probably some more discussion about some of the things about maintenance and how you're able to reuse it, and or how you're not able to use it actually. But we're going to move on. Let's go to the next one.
Okay, so Gary, can you tell us a little bit about where the National Drug Code is used?
Well, you've opened up a can of worms, Aaron. We put together this graphic, and it does need some explanation. It's a little bit overwhelming when you first see it. On the left-hand side, let's start with the manufacturer. If you're in the audience and you are manufacturing drug products, one of the things that you do is report this NDC number in your drug listing to the FDA. So that is a report, required, mandatory, and the FDA does not keep that quiet. So they actually put that NDC number along with your information in many different databases, and these are public databases. There's something called the NDC directory. So we talked about the origins of that being paper-based, but now electronically based. Very nice search capability. You can go through and find finished, unfinished drugs. There's good search for company and labeler code and so on, but that's public. There's the NDC SPL data elements file. This particular file is used by CMS, and there's some reimbursement implications of that, but the NDC number is obviously inside there. Labels.fda.gov. And the one that is widely used, these two databases have similar information, not exactly the same, but all of these include NDC, the National Library of Medicine Daily Med. So this is well over 150,000 drug labels at this point. And you can do some search and sorting and look at the contents, and there is a drug listing section presented at the bottom of that document, and you'll all see the NDC number for the base product and other higher level packaging levels. That information is also exposed through APIs through the Open FDA. So for those automated type of searches and data retrieval, that information is also available there. But that's not the only place you put your NDC. You report it to the FDA for some regulatory purposes, but in addition to that, you have NDC information when you do the preparation to advertise this particular product to the public, and to either patients, doctors, and downstream here, there's NDC numbers that would appear on your website, other advertising materials, maybe it's still printed perhaps in a magazine, but NDC is used for media purposes and published in that particular fashion. And then the bottom example, NDC numbers obviously show up on the actual product, on the product label. There's information in a barcode, and also presented many times in text, voluntarily able to be put on there as text. But that's one place you'll see the NDC number. If there's a package insert, there'll be information in there as well as about the NDC number. So there's electronic distribution, there's physical paper distribution, and there's also regulatory distribution. So there's a lot of different targets and a lot of different pathways. So as we work our way to the right-hand side, there are a number of entities that pull that information together, data aggregators that might show up in an electronic health record system. CMS, we talked a little bit earlier about using this information. And then another wave, the second wave from the end here, the drug dispensers and the healthcare providers. So this is down to the physicians, the pharmacies, and your hospitals and clinics and so on, and other distribution pathways of getting eventually finally to the end wave here where we have patients. So now it's administered to an actual patient, and there's a record of the NDC that has been sent to a particular patient. It might even be online mail. It might be physical pickup at a pharmacy. It might be in a hospital, and it's administered there. But in addition to that patient, there's this public information about the product, and then there's a lot of information about the drug product payers, insurance. There's reimbursement. There's traceability, registries, some data mining, and so on. So this is a pretty big map, Erin. And like I said, you opened up a can of worms with that question.
Yeah.
When you have an NDC, you think, oh, I'm just going to send it to the FDA and I'm done with it, and then I'll give it to the operations people to print on the product. Well, be aware that make sure it's correct. Because you'd hate to have to do a recall, because once this number gets into this industry, all these downstream users, it's very difficult to correct and make any modifications. So it becomes embedded in these downstream uses. So with that, Aaron, let's move on.
Okay, so hopefully that's a little more straightforward, Gary, but we'll see.
Yeah.
So what is the CMS NDC 11?
Oh, so this is that CMS, the very same entity that we were talking about a little bit earlier that uses NDC number. The Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS, they have created an 11-digit version of the FDA's 10-digit version. There's some reason for that to make the length of the or the format identical, and we'll take a look at that. There is some history there. It goes back to the HIPAA, the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. So you'll see some roots for this 11-digit going back to HIPAA, and it's used now by a lot of different government databases. Pharmacies definitely are using this 11-digit version, insurance companies and so on. So it's related back to the 10-digit FDA NDC number, but it's modified for some of these downstream uses. So as a manufacturer, you probably are not involved too much with the CMS 11-digit NDC number, but those downstream users of your product, definitely are making use of the NDC 11 version. So let's figure out what the code or what the little algorithm is to create a CMS 11-digit out of the FDA 10-digit NDC. So a couple things we need to be aware of right up front. We have these 11 digits. There's no hyphens in the final presentation. That's different than the FDA NDC, which makes use of those 2 hyphens. So we're able to take the NDC with those 4 different formats, the 442, the 532, and the 541 formats. There's 3 that we talked about. And one of the advantages of the CMS is that it creates a uniform 542 format. Now to do that, it needs to add a 0. The algorithm places a 0 in front of one of the segments as necessary to make this standard 542 format. So if we take the very first row, this example, we have this 442, and it has this 1234 1234-12 example. And in this particular case, to make it 542, we need to add the red 0 to the front of the labeler code. So now that 0 becomes part of the full NDC number, and then in use we remove the hyphens, and we have this number on the right hand side. It starts with 0 and ends with a 2. So you kind of see the idea. In the second row we have a 532, and to make that 542, we have to add the red 0 to the product code in the beginning, and now we have this red 0 in the middle, and the last scenario is you add the leading 0 to the package code, so it becomes 2 digits there. So now you have a standard 542, and you have these zeros embedded in the scenario. One of the issues with the NDC 11 is that once you have this created and you're looking at it, it's not deterministic to decipher what the original format was. So you can kind of look at these and make some guesses, but it's not always one-to-one as to what the original code was. For example, if there were some zeros in the original code and you see a zero in the middle, you're not sure where that was coming from. Was that part of the original NDC number, or was that the embedded zero? So it's not deterministic to reverse this algorithm and go back to the FDA NDC codes. You can always go to the right, left to right, take an NDC code and create the NDC 11. So if you hear that term, that's what that is all about. And the use case, as a manufacturer, I don't think you'll have too much exposure to this particular nuance, but it is definitely out there and used by a lot of downstream users. What is down the road, Aaron? I think you had some questions about what's the future.
Yes, that is the question, Gary. What is the future of NDC?
Yeah. So one of the things, Aaron, was that we talked about some of the formats that we have, and that the labeler code originally had 4 digits, and then they ran out of numbers. You know, there was a lot more requests, organizations that needed to be assigned labeler codes, and so the precedent was they created a 5-digit labeler code. So that's all well and good, but guess what? We've been moving along for a number of years, and there's some estimates. Maybe it's 5 to 8, and I don't think it's real deterministic. There's some estimates that relatively soon the FDA is going to run out of the 5-digit labeler codes. So they have in place a plan to create a 6-digit labeler code. And the proposal is to create a uniform format. So not, we already have 3 formats, and you know, with a 6-digit labeler code, you know, easily you could create 2 or 3 more on top of the 3, but that is not the game plan. So the FDA wants to use this particular event with a 6-digit labeler code to create a uniform 642 format. So the FDA has put out some information. If you'd like to read about that, almost a year now, back in July 22nd, 2022, the FDA released a proposed rule on how they were considering this 6-digit scenario, what the game plan is. They talked about a implementation time. So this is just a proposed rule, but when it comes final, they are estimating or they're planning to have a 5-year implementation timeline, and then after that 5 years, make it effective. And then once that does become effective, if you still had made use of the old format without 6 digits, there's a labeling transition. So if you had products that were just labeled prior to the effective date, there's 3 years for you to change out that labeling. FDA highly encourages early use of the 642 once it is turns into a final rule and gets near that effective date. So on the right-hand corner here, you see how this layout is going to be, and this would be for all products. So even the products that have the existing 3 different formats, that would have to be modified and placed into this 642, 6 digits for the labeler code, 4 for the product, and 2 for the package. So I think that's the quick little summary on the NDC. Aaron, where do we want to go next?
Well, hopefully everyone can take this all in. That is a big change coming up.
Yeah,
and if you guys have any questions about the NDC, I know we had a few come in, but definitely feel free to drop them in the question box. But for now, Gary, I think we'll move on to the FEI numbers, if that sounds good to you.
Okay, so FEI. What's the first question there? Oh, what is it?
we're going back to basics with just like we did with the NDC. We get asked all the time from our customers, what is the FEI number and what is it used for?
All right, so let's work our way through this. FEI, so first of all, we have to figure out what that stands for. FDA Establishment Identification Number, FEI. And just to keep things simple, I found an FDA definition, so I just quoted it right here. It's an identifier used by the FDA to track inspections of the regulated establishment or facility. So when a new drug is being reviewed, there's inspections for that and a periodic timing for ongoing inspections as well as generics and so on. And the FDA has used this long established FEI number to determine, where is the actual site. It can actually be a little bit fuzzy. I've heard some implications. It could be a 1 mile or up to a 5 mile type of a radius. So it might be a campus where a couple buildings are involved, but it's a location where an inspector can go and spend the day and do evaluation of everything that he needs to do to check out the drug operations. So if you're a large company and you have multiple manufacturing sites and they're spread at least more than 5 and 10 miles apart, you're going to have multiple FEIs. So a dedicated FEI for each one of those particular sites. The other use for this particular identifier is used for the generic drug user fee amendments. So that particular activity has some collections. There's some fees for the particular registration, and you'll need to report the FEI number for that particular activity. So going back to some of the early assignments, there's 7 digits, and as I understand it more recently, you'll see a 10-digit number, no hyphens, it's just straightforward numbers. All right, so that's the quick overview, Aaron. What's the next one we want to get into here?
So when and how would you get an FEI number?
Well, this is a little bit different than what we talked about for the labeler code and reporting labeler code where SPL is involved. The actual assignment of the FEI number comes from the FDA, so they actually own this database and they will assign it to you. And the FDA recommends that the time of established registration is a good time for you as the owner to obtain this FEI number. So that's usually near the end of the application evaluation, but it's certainly good to do that when you register your establishment. There's no cost involved. It's pretty straightforward. You can go to these 2 email links and send an email in. There are like 4 or 5 fields about your product, the company name, address, contact information, and so on. So this FDA Establishment ID document, you can link to that and find those particular attributes. It's pretty straightforward. Put those bits of information in that email, request it, and the FDA will return this FEI number back to you. Now, what you might want to check before you actually request one is to do a search to see if someone else in your company has already done this, and they might have a long-standing FEI number. I'm not aware that they go obsolete, so you might want to check around to see if anyone has done this prior to your activity. So there is a FDA search portal. You can go there, create an account. The other way to do that, just to do some confirmation, is you can go to the drug establishment's current registration site. So when you submit SPL establishment registrations, the data from those documents populate this database, and it will include that FEI number as it's available. So you can do a quick check to both these places, and if you find one, great. You don't need to search any further. That'll take care of your FEI assignment. Otherwise, you'll get one back from the FDA. Do we want to move on to another topic? I see time's getting short.
It is. But I believe our questions get fewer and fewer as the sections go on. So that's the good news.
Good.
Yeah. So thank you for covering that FEI for us, Gary. And now if we could just get into the DUNS numbers. The first question that we have for DUNS is, again, back to the basics. What is the DUNS identifier?
The DUNS number. Okay. So the DUNS identifier always had to kind of remember this and figure this out. What DUNS stood for, it's that Data Universal Numbering System. It doesn't roll off the tongue real well. DUNS actually works a little better. Now, this is not an FDA numbering system. So one of the points here is that DUNS numbers are assigned and managed by a private company, Dun & Bradstreet. So Dun & Bradstreet has been using DUNS numbers to identify organizations for years and years, and it was predominantly used in the financial industry for keeping track of credit, finding information about the size of the company, the family, who owns what lower company, and what's the umbrella, what's the corporate umbrella look like, with all the sub companies and subsidiaries and so on. So there is most likely, if you're new to this, there is most likely a DUNS number already assigned to your particular organization. It's possible it's not, but it's very likely that a number already exists. But this number is unique to your particular business. It can be used around the world. There's not only U.S. sites, but outside the U.S. sites that have DUNS numbers. This 9-digit number will identify a particular address and site, as well as a business operation. So technically, you can have maybe manufacturing and maybe some kind of another business operation, headquarters or something at the very same address, and it could have 2 different DUNS numbers. But the minimum is that each of your headquarters, each of your establishment, if you are involved as an importer or you have a U.S. agent, each of these business entities will have a specific DUNS number. Now, why do we talk about DUNS numbers? DUNS numbers are part of that identification when you put your request in for a labeler code. So the FDA wants to tie this back to your particular company. It's also reported in the drug establishment registration and also the listing. So DUNS numbers are used quite frequently by the FDA. They've adopted this private numbering system rather than creating their own. And they also elected not to use the FEI number for some of this registration purposes to a product. I don't know all the reasons for that. I suspect it's because the FEI number is not extremely exact, and when you want to find the particular address of a particular component being or ingredient being manufactured, it doesn't serve very well. So rather than trying to make some updates and rehaul that, they just adopted the DUNS numbering, which they were able to leverage that particular capability, which is well established, used widely around the world, and it points to a particular address. So there's 9 digits in a DUNS number. And you see in the bottom here, the sample, there are 2 digits, a dash, 3 digits, a dash, and then 4 more. So you have this 2, 3, 4 type of formatting. And if you go to the Dun & Bradstreet website and get some information, they'll make use of the dash numbers. Noteworthy, though, is that when this information is submitted to the FDA, the hyphens are omitted. So it's just simply a string of 9 digits that you have all together, and that makes up your DUNS number. What are some of the other questions, Aaron, about the DUNS number here that we want to get into?
Okay, Gary, so can you explain when and how to get a DUNS number?
Yeah, so when, I think just because it's so well used and established in business and finance that you would probably want to go to your accounting people or financial people and see if you already have one. It's definitely required to, in many cases, to operate as a business. So it's very possible that you have that already in place. But in the event you don't, the FDI requires DUNS. Probably the first time you're going to see the requirement is this NDC labeler code request, and you'll definitely need to embark and get that DUNS number. So that kind of is a early criteria to move forward, and then all those other submissions, the establishment, registration, drug listing, and so on, all need that DUNS number. So how can you get it? Pretty straightforward. There's no cost. You can go to the Dun & Bradstreet, either call them or go follow this link. You can also check if someone else had already created one for your site. The Dun & Bradstreet has a lookup. You need to put the company name in, the address, and they'll do a quick search to see if you have one. And the very same link that we talked about earlier, if someone is already making use of a DUNS number and it happens to show up in an establishment registration that was in place long before you came around, you can go to the Decker site, this current registration site, and learn about that and find the DUNS number a couple different ways. Just do a quick check. Aaron, what's
Gary.
Last one, or might be last one or two here?
I think this is the last question, and hopefully, because we have about 6 minutes left.
Oh dear.
So why are there ongoing issues with the FDA use of DUNS?
Well, if you talk to the regulatory people that have been submitting SPL documents with DUNS in it, just be careful. They might get a little angry, and let's figure out why. This is a very charged issue, and it's in place, pretty much from day one, still continues. So we know that Dun & Bradstreet collects and manages company information for your company, and they tie that back to the DUNS number. Okay, that's fine. And then periodically, it used to be monthly. I don't know if it's any more frequent, but the FDA periodically receives an updated copy of the Dun & Bradstreet database. Now, when a manufacturer submits data and they point to the DUNS number and they also put an address in and phone number and contact information and so on, the FDA validates those submitted entries against the copy that they have of the Dun & Bradstreet database. And they'll either accept it and say, okay, yep, this matches. And there could be subtle errors. I'm talking, limited, and then maybe with a period or without a period, or PLC, or so on. It's very tight type of matching that has to be done, and very commas and other types of characters can cause an error. So let's say you finally get in sync. Your submitted entry exactly matches what Dun & Bradstreet has and what the FDA has. Now, the rub on this is that this information, company name and address, is updated by the Dun & Bradstreet organization. Sometimes just slightly modified, but updated, whatever. And that is triggered by some huge amount of research and monitoring that they do. So, they might read some articles and, discover, there's some evidence there that the limited now has a comma, in front of it or something like that. And that types of automation will automatically change the database value. So now we have a problem. What you think is the version is no longer in sync with the database that Dun & Bradstreet has. And there can be validation errors. So if you do happen to learn of this change early and you submit the new information in an SPL submission before the FDA received their update, now you're going to have a validation error. And it's like, okay, what the heck's going on here? I thought I had it right. It's the FDA's not updated in sync with everybody else yet. Or another scenario could happen. Maybe you're not aware that the Dun & Bradstreet updated the information and you use the old info in an SPL submission to the FDA. Meanwhile, the FDA finally receives their update and now they're working off a different data set than what you have. And when the submission comes in, it won't match up with their database. Again, a validation error is generated. If this happened once, it happened, hundreds and hundreds of times. So it can be resolved. It takes a lot of manhandling and it's a lot of frustration. So manufacturers have difficulty in changing or freezing their company information in the Dun & Bradstreet database. So we're relying, or the FDA is relying on them to provide current information, and it just doesn't work out real well with the changes with all the parties involved. So with that, I'd like to just kind of summarize, Aaron, if you don't mind, some of the support that we do here at RETEC.
Yep, that would be great, Gary. Thank you.
Okay, so the various submissions that we talked about in this SPL document, this XML document, we here at RETEC, live and breathe that type of SPL preparation and submission. We know that extremely well. So information about your labeler code request, we can advise you the fields to collect, and we can pull that information together, process that, and build the SPL document. And in some cases, that output package can be submitted directly to the FDA. In other cases, and also the establishment registration in the same fashion, we're able to pull that in. Established registration has that DUNS number and has that FEI number, captured in it, and that information can be submitted directly. Some of the labeling information about your product would need to make a return trip back through your facility and be submitted through an ECTD in Module 1. Listing information can go directly to the FDA, so we're able to present that as a service for you. So the bottom line is we're very familiar with these particular numbers, how to collect them, what the impact is, and we're able to process that and make your life a lot easier in keeping them current and up to date, and figuring out how to comply with the FDA regulations, and then being able to confirm that they in fact have made it through the FDA and are published in these public databases. With that, I'll mention that there is this one slide when you receive the documents, talks about a lot of the benefits that we offer here at RETEC if you make use of our services and product. It simplifies your management, streamlines that workflow, and reduces your creation time. So there's a lot of experience and expertise that we bring to bear in processing these. So with that, Aaron, are you able to slip in one or two questions? I see that we're on the hour.
So yeah, we can probably go ahead and cover one or two. I will
Okay.
say we got a ton of questions, so we will definitely be sure to follow up with you individually, to get those answers over to you if your question doesn't get answered today. But Gary, one question that we have gotten asked quite a few times during this presentation is when can the NDC code, I'm sorry, be assigned to a product?
Well, that's interesting. So a few years ago, the FDA allowed for a reservation of an NDC number. So you can submit a, pretty much an empty listing, but it has the NDC number that you would like to use, and you can reserve it. I think there's a time limit of about a year where that particular NDC number can be reserved. So that can be very early on while you're even in evaluation, you're planning a product to bring to the market. Now, the advantage of quote reserving an NDC number is that the FDA will confirm that it's free or available. No one else has stepped on that particular NDC number. A lot of times this is very helpful if you have a contract manufacturer and a private label distributor, and sometimes the administration of these numbers kind of overlaps, and one party doesn't know what the other party's doing in some cases. So making a reservation is very smart, and you're able to do that at no charge. Go ahead and send that in. So if you don't do that, then very early in or near the end of, I should say, near the end of the evaluation of your product, if it's a new product or like an NDA or ANDA, it makes sense to submit that. So as long as you have the information in place, you can submit an NDC number. So remember, the criteria is that you have to have a labeler code. So one of the real questions is, how early can I get a labeler code? And there's no limit on that. You can get a labeler code very early on. And you might have one from 5-10 years ago. You certainly can use that. And then I would use this NDC reservation as an option to go ahead and submit and have one already in place and kind of tie it to your particular product. So Aaron, do you have another one?
Yeah, another great question about the NDC number. If we have a product with both a carton and a label, should the package code segment of the NDC be the same for both?
Yes, the product code would remain the same through a packaging hierarchy. So
I'm sorry, the package code, Gary.
Yeah. So no, the product code should remain the same. The package code should definitely change. So if you had a bottle and then, well, let me take that back a little bit. Let's say if you put a bottle in a carton and it's 1 in 1, so you put a bottle in a box. In that particular scenario where it's quantity 1 in 1, one bottle and one box, in that particular case, the package code should stay the same. But if you put 2 of those bottles in a box, then the package code has to be different. So, and if we have some more details, or we'll be able to get back to you about that particular scenario.
Yeah, and if you do have a particular scenario, you can always reach out to us, pharma@readtech.com, or your account executive, account manager, if you're an existing customer, and we're happy to help you answer that. Gary, I know it's about 5 after, but maybe we can squeeze in just one more.
Yeah, sure.
So how do we add the FEI to the establishment registration?
Oh, so there is a field in the establishment registration for FEI, and you're able to enter that field. Now, when you first submit an establishment registration, the DUNS number is required, but if you don't have your FEI number yet, you can leave that back for the first submission. So I was actually talking to the production team about this particular scenario. And they have found that when they go and submit a second and third version of that establishment registration, now the FEI does need to be there. So there is a field that would be included in that SPL, and maybe that's the only change. You're adding a FEI number to the establishment registration. That's certainly okay. There's some administration. The version has to be increased, and there's some identification that needs to be, the doc ID needs to change, but the set ID does not change, so we take care of all that administration activity to allow you to submit an FEI number.
Awesome. All right. Well, like I said, we still have many more questions, but we will follow up individually with everyone who has asked a question. Gary, thank you so much for giving us your time today and covering so much material. This was really helpful for me, so I hope the audience found it really helpful as well. And thank you to all of our attendees today. And please look forward to more invitations for remaining segments of our Upskill with ReTech webinar series. Thanks, everyone, and have a great day.
All right. Thank you, Erin. All right. See you, everyone. Bye now.